Well, Stanley, means to me the courage of a singular vision that requires a lot of collaboration to achieve, but doesn't require any collaboration to basically create. Meaning,
There's a strange, unspoken truth in the world of cinema. We often talk about the movies we love, the directors who shaped our imaginations, and the unforgettable scenes that stay with us. But rarely do we pause to consider who shaped those directors themselves. Not just their influences behind the camera, but the human faces in front of it, the actors whose presence held the frame, line after line, scene after scene. What makes a performance great? It's not always technique. Sometimes it's presence, sometimes it's trust, and sometimes it's a matter of instinct, a director's gut feeling that they've just witnessed something real, something lasting. Steven Spielberg, perhaps the most iconic filmmaker of the last century, doesn't often hand out such titles lightly. So when he did name his greatest actors of all time, his top 5, fired off without hesitation in a conversation with Stanley Kubrick, it revealed something deeper, a window into how one master storyteller views the power of performance. It began with a conversation that wasn't meant for the public, a private moment between two of the most influential directors in cinematic history. When Steven Spielberg and Stanley Kubrick spoke, they weren't trying to impress anyone. They were searching for truth in a form of art that demands both precision and risk. It was during one of those discussions that an honest comment from Spielberg set off something deeper. An exploration of performance, instinct, and the many ways brilliance can manifest. Spielberg had just seen The Shining. It left him uneasy, not because of its horror, but because of the way Jack Nicholson moved through it. His performance struck Spielberg as too heightened, as if Nicholson was performing for a different kind of stage. His expressions outsized, his voice teetering between madness and mockery. Spielberg didn't hold back. He told Kubrick that Nicholson's choices felt disconnected from psychological realism. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't restrained. To Spielberg, it lacked the grounded emotion he admired. Kubrick didn't disagree to agree. He asked a question that forced Spielberg out of the role of critic and into the position of instinctive responder. No time to analyze, no time to prepare. He wanted to hear Spielberg's top 5 actors without filters or overthinking. What followed was a list that reflected tradition, the classic icons of American film. These were actors known for their control, for their understated strength, for the kind of presence that doesn't need to shout to command attention. Spencer Tracy, Henry Fonda, Jimmy Stewart, Cary Grant, Clark Gable. Each one a monument in film history, each known for a kind of calm authority, a balanced presence on screen. But then Kubrick asked, "Where's James Cagney?" Not a confrontation, not a rejection, a question that sliced through Spielberg's list like a surgical tool. Kubrick wasn't just advocating for Cagney, he was asking Spielberg, and maybe himself, to reconsider what greatness looks like. Cagney didn't play it safe. He vibrated with energy, exploded with urgency, and shaped characters that were jagged and alive. He brought a physicality that didn't conform to classical acting traditions. And yet, he was undeniable. That one question reframed the original critique. Nicholson's performance may not have followed a textbook psychological arc, but was that truly the measure of brilliance? What if his madness was precisely the point? Not to draw empathy, but to unsettle. What if his scale, his unpredictability, was the only way to make that descent into chaos feel real? The conversation didn't end with a winner. That was never the point. What mattered was the depth of the exchange. Kubrick was always interrogating assumptions, and Spielberg, despite being deeply successful, was open to being challenged. Together, they weren't looking for agreement. They were testing the boundaries of their beliefs. There's something magnetic about that moment because it reveals a hidden dimension of filmmaking that the public rarely sees. Behind the crafted shots and polished scripts, there are conversations like this, sharp, vulnerable, and essential. Directors of this caliber don't arrive at their visions in isolation. They're constantly pushing against each other, raising questions that refuse easy answers. In this particular dialogue, two different understandings of performance collided. One leaned towards structure and emotional clarity. The other embraced extremes, even at the risk of discomfort. And in the middle stood Cagney, proof that both perspectives could be valid, depending on what lens you choose to look through. So much is revealed in that brief exchange. It's about acting, yes, but more than that, it's about perception. It's about how personal taste intersects with artistic judgment. It's about how even the most accomplished creators remain students of the form, learning through disagreement, growing through contrast. That's why Spielberg's list and Kubrick's response still matter. It wasn't about who was right. It was about asking better questions, about seeing performance not just as execution, but as interpretation, and about recognizing that sometimes greatness comes in forms we aren't ready to see until someone else points it out. Each of the 5 actors Spielberg named offers more than legacy. They reflect a philosophy of storytelling rooted in character over spectacle. These names weren't chosen for status or popularity. Each one speaks to a prioritized of presence, a balance between vulnerability and strength that Spielberg has long prioritized in his own work. Their inclusion, taken together, forms a kind of map to Spielberg's sensibilities, particularly how he sees the emotional core of cinema. Spencer Tracy stands as the most grounded of the 5. He didn't manipulate the audience's emotions with theatrical gestures. Instead, he embodied a kind of stillness, a clarity that didn't draw attention to itself, yet never went unnoticed. Spielberg's admiration here is unmistakable. In his films, performances are rarely ornamental. They serve a deeper function, revealing character through quiet conviction rather than explosive expression. You see this reflected in roles like Tom Hanks in Saving Private Ryan or Liam Neeson in Schindler's List. There's a moral seriousness, a quiet center that Tracy perfected and Spielberg clearly values. What Tracy excelled at was creating characters who didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. He played men who grappled with internal conflict in ways that didn't spill over unnecessarily. That approach shaped Spielberg's trust in performance. That restraint can be as powerful as an outburst. That a glance can say more than a monologue. Tracy didn't disappear into roles. He brought himself to them, not in a self-centered way, but in a way that reminded audiences of something deeply recognizable. Spielberg carries this same belief, that authenticity is stronger than artifice. Henry Fonda represented a different dimension of integrity. His characters often found themselves in moral situations where the line between right and wrong wasn't just theoretical, it was personal. The best example of this is 12 Angry Men, where Fonda plays a juror committed to truth over convenience. This calm determination, this refusal to be swayed by pressure or prejudice, is a quality Spielberg has long infused in his protagonists. Think of Lincoln, where the narrative hinges on one man's ability to navigate politics and principle at once. Or Bridge of Spies, where Tom Hanks's character defends justice not because it's easy, but because it's right. Fonda's selection reveals something deeper about Spielberg. He's drawn to actors who can project moral clarity without sentimentality. In an age where cynicism can sometimes pass for sophistication, Fonda's sincerity becomes radical. For Spielberg, sincerity isn't weakness. It's the foundation of drama. Jimmy Stewart brought a layer of vulnerability to this group that's essential. Stewart's gift was his openness, not just in his tone or expressions, but in how he allowed the audience into his uncertainty. There's a fragility to his strength. He didn't hide when a character was unraveling. He let the breakdown happen, and Spielberg took note. In The Fabelmans, the idea of understanding one's own life through cinema, of transforming trauma into meaning, is very much in Stewart's lineage. There's a similar transparency in E.T. or Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where the emotional stakes are grounded in longing, in loss, and in the hope of reconciliation. Stewart gave emotion a visible shape, and Spielberg, though famous for his mastery of visual spectacle, never abandoned the belief that emotional truth matters more. He built entire narratives around the ability of his actors to hold complexity and contradiction in a single glance, a method Stewart defined across decades. Cary Grant, in contrast, injected controlled lightness into Spielberg's pantheon. His inclusion wasn't just about elegance or humor, it was about the intelligence behind the performance. Grant never played dumb. Even in comedies, his timing was surgical, his wit sharp. Spielberg understood that levity could carry sophistication. In Catch Me If You Can, Leonardo DiCaprio channels that same style, charm used strategically, confidence veiling insecurity, and a character who stays one step ahead by virtue of charisma as much as talent. Grant's place in Spielberg's list also suggests an appreciation for screen presence that doesn't demand emotional weight every time. Sometimes, the success of a scene depends on how relaxed an actor can be while still holding attention. That's Grant's legacy, and it's visible in Spielberg's more playful work, where tone shifts quickly and the actor must control that rhythm. Clark Gable closes the list with gravity, not the kind that drags, but the kind that anchors. Gable represented a vision of masculinity that was assured, yet complicated. He had range without appearing to try. His performance in Gone with the Wind revealed a man who could be proud and vulnerable, self-assured and quietly shaken. Spielberg's male leads, from Indiana Jones to Richard Dreyfuss' character in Jaws, often walk a similar line. They're never static. They evolve. They reveal insecurities under the weight of confidence. Gable wasn't just powerful because of his voice or look. He had command without needing to dominate every frame. Spielberg saw that kind of authority as crucial, the ability to suggest history in a single scene, to imply inner conflict without spelling it out. It's the kind of depth that allows a story to unfold naturally, giving the audience time to absorb and reflect. Together, these 5 choices are not a personal favorites list or a tribute to nostalgia. They form a code. They reveal what Spielberg watches for in a performance: emotional clarity, inner life, and the discipline to serve the story above the self. These actors weren't just influential. They helped define a philosophy of character that Spielberg has spent his entire career honoring. James Cagney's absence from Spielberg's list isn't just a footnote in a private conversation. It holds weight. It reveals a gap not in Spielberg's knowledge, but in the instinctive framework that shapes his understanding of performance. Kubrick's immediate reaction, asking, "Where's James Cagney?" wasn't a criticism, it was a challenge. It pointed to a missing piece that reframed the entire discussion. not as a correction but as an expansion. Cagney was a force. He didn't deliver lines, he attacked them. His performances had a kind of danger, a sense that anything could happen next. He didn't settle into characters, he made them electric. That kind of energy wasn't Spielberg's natural territory. His lens has always been drawn to restraint, to emotion that builds rather than explodes. Cagney, by contrast, erupted. He didn't seek comfort, and he didn't play it safe. For Kubrick, that made him essential. For Spielberg, it made him unfamiliar. What makes Cagney's exclusion so significant is that it exposes the differences in how these two directors viewed performance. Kubrick valued disruption. He believed in the actor as a destabilizing force. Someone like Cagney, with his volatility and risk, was aligned with that vision. Kubrick didn't want control from his actors. He wanted tension. Cagney represented that kind of tension perfectly. He could swing from charm to threat in a second and do it without warning. That unpredictability was part of his brilliance. For Spielberg, that same quality may have felt less accessible. His characters often operate within a moral universe, even when it's complex or under pressure. His stories lean toward resolution, toward moments of reckoning. Cagney rarely delivered those moments in a traditional sense. He challenged the viewer to keep up, to accept characters who weren't seeking redemption or clarity. His presence was magnetic, but it didn't invite comfort. The exchange between Spielberg and Kubrick wasn't just about actors, it was about ideals. It was about the kind of cinema each one trusted. Spielberg favored performances that deepened emotion and made characters relatable. Kubrick leaned toward those who shattered form and revealed something raw. In that light, Cagney becomes more than the missing name. He becomes the boundary. He defines the outer edge of Spielberg's comfort and Kubrick's challenge. Looking at Spielberg's 5 choices, a pattern emerges. Each actor embodies control, empathy, and a steady hand. Their performances guide the audience. They create space for reflection. Cagney, in contrast, demanded attention. He overwhelmed, transformed, and destabilized. Kubrick understood that power. He didn't need every actor to comfort the audience. Sometimes he wanted them to provoke. So when Kubrick invoked Cagney, he wasn't trying to dismiss Spielberg's preferences. He was asking a larger question. What is acting supposed to do? Is it about connection or disruption? About identification or confrontation? That's why this moment matters. Not because someone was right or wrong, but because it exposes the limits of instinct and the value of expanding them. When Spielberg was asked to name the greatest actors of all time, he didn't reach for the familiar names of his own era. He didn't mention the stars he's worked with closely or the ones who have defined recent generations of film. There was no Tom Hanks, despite multiple collaborations and some of the most emotionally resonant performances in modern cinema. No Leonardo DiCaprio, whose transformation in Catch Me If You Can remains one of Spielberg's most engaging portraits of complexity. No Meryl Streep, who brought both nuance and authority to the post. And no Whoopi Goldberg, whose performance in The Color Purple remains one of her most powerful. Their absence wasn't a reflection of merit. It wasn't about lack of respect or recognition. It was about instinct. The question posed wasn't clinical or strategic. It asked for a gut reaction. The names that live at the core of Spielberg's understanding of what acting can be. Not the names he shaped, but the ones that shaped him. When pressed, his mind went not to recent collaborators, but to earlier figures who defined his earliest impressions of cinema. It was about the actors who taught him through their work, what presence, timing, depth, and restraint could look like. These were performances he experienced not through scripts or sets, but as a young viewer. They didn't work for him. They worked on him. The actors Spielberg named weren't part of his filmography. They were part of his memory. Their influence came long before his directorial voice had formed, before he stepped onto his first set. These were the performances that set the standard in his imagination. In that way, the question pulled from a different space, not professional admiration, but formative awe. What followed that instinctive response was more than a list. It led to a deeper reflection between two filmmakers with different ideas about what acting could and should be. Spielberg's hesitation about Jack Nicholson's performance in The Shining sparked a revealing tension. Kubrick responded, not with justification but with challenge. He brought up James Cagney, asking Spielberg to confront his own assumptions about performance and control. This wasn't just a debate. It was a legacy conversation, not about one film, but about how two artists understand the craft at its core. Spielberg values precision, emotional transparency, and moral clarity. Kubrick often leaned toward unpredictability, complexity, and confrontation. These aren't just creative choices, they're philosophies. When Cagney's name entered the conversation, the tone shifted. He represented a different kind of greatness, one that didn't rely on subtlety or realism, one that was visceral, unstable, and unapologetically bold. For Spielberg, it was an opportunity to rethink the boundaries of what he usually admires. It may not have changed his list, but it expanded his awareness. That moment captured the essence of what happens when two minds at the height of their craft challenge each other, not to win, but to grow. In a way, Spielberg's list is less a final judgment and more a time capsule, a snapshot of how one man, standing at the top of his craft, reflects on the giants whose shoulders he stood on. Whether you agree with his 5 or Kubrick's 6th, or think other names deserve a place in the pantheon, what matters most is this: great acting doesn't always look the same. And that's why it stays with us. If this kind of deep dive into cinematic history, creative conversations, and behind-the-scenes storytelling speaks to you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. Who would make your top 5 actors of all time? Your voice belongs in this conversation. Until next time, keep watching and keep wondering.